All right, so I have just pulled off my yarn. This is just a few rollags that I've sort of spun together in order to make this yarn. This is a 2-ply yarn. It was spun woolen. And so let's talk a little bit about how I'm going about spinning all of these rollags. Okay, so you can see from this big pile of rollags here, I had a couple of considerations that were in my mind as I was thinking about how I was going to spin these. First being that rollags are a woolen preparation. They're designed to be a woolen preparation, meaning that all of the fibers are meant to not be parallel and uniform and perfectly aligned. It's not meant to make a really smooth and even and perfect yarn. It's meant to create kind of like a spiral of fibers. So the fibers are making sort of like a tangled mesh of fibers, almost like a sponge-like structure. And that sponge-like structure of woolen fibers is what is going to give this yarn a lot of warmth. There's a lot of insulating qualities to this kind of yarn. So a woolen yarn has really like a very fluffy, insulating quality to it, making it great for things like hats or mitts or outerwear, those kinds of things. So that's the first thing that I had to think about as I was thinking about spinning these rollags, is that I could spin them woolen style. Now, I had mentioned to Greta that I'm not a great woolen spinner. I don't feel like I'm really like had a lot of practice with long draw or things like that. I mostly spin short backward or short forward. I like really smooth kinds of yarns. So practicing with this woolen style of spinning is really, it's a challenge for me. It's a bit requires practice from my point of view. And she was telling me that like, well, you don't have to spin them this way. You don't have to spin them in a woolen format. If you wanted to, you could still pull forward, draft forward from the tip of this rollag and make sort of like a more semi sort of draft. So you're going to work with a woolen fiber prep, but you're going to spin it a worsted style if you like. So that's one of the things that you could do. Or you could practice long draw and spin these rollags long draw. So we're going to look at that. The other thing is that these rollags that I made are a little bit long. You don't necessarily need to spin them all the way like from one end to the other end. If you wanted to, you could break them in half. You could break them into multiple pieces, mix up the chunks and spin them out of order if you like. You can see even this one is kind of falling apart a little bit. So I could just break it off here and spin it into 2 different pieces. However, that is going to change your sort of color situation here. If you wanted to keep this color gradient and you wanted to keep them going in this order, then you would sort of try to preserve your rollag and spin them like this. But if you don't care about, mixing up the colors, then that is another way to go about it. That was the other consideration that I had when I was looking at this entire pile of rollags. I had chosen from all sorts of different color blends that we had made at the studio, and these were all colors that were inspired by different instructors that we have in the School of SweetGeorgia. So basically, each one of our spinning instructors came up with some inspiration for a fiber colorway that they wanted to create, and then we translated that into a color. So you can check out our website. It's called Color Collaborations, and these are all like winter collaborations about like sunsets on snow or sunrise on snow. They're just a lot of inspirational images from our spinning instructors. And so those translated into colors, and every one of those colors is very, very different. So some, like Debbie's, had this sort of flaming orange sky kind of look to it. And then there are others that were much more subdued, much more calm and quiet sort of colorways. We had a couple where I kind of mixed up some of the colors. So I took some of the darker blues from one and then I mixed it with more of the bright orange and browns from another. So I kind of already was mixing between the different colorways as I was creating these rollags. So now that I have this big bundle of rollags, one of the things that I thought was maybe I have to spin sort of each collection, each set that came off the blending board. Maybe I spin all of these and make a 2-ply yarn. And then I'm going to have like, I don't know, 10 different tiny mini skeins of 2-ply yarn. And she said, you don't have to do that either. And so Greta had suggested that you could, if you wanted to, take one rollag from each sort of different colorway or pull them out randomly and spin them all in succession. And then as you do that, when you ply them together, they will become overall a little bit more cohesive. And so all of these blended together could create a really, really interesting colorway on its own. And so that's kind of what has happened here with this little test skein. So this is the 2-ply test skein that's just come off of the bobbin here. This has not been washed or anything like that. It's not been finished, so it's still a little bit like loose. Once you wash it and wet finish it, it'll bloom and all the plies will relax and it'll become this beautiful, beautiful yarn. But already this is actually like a really, really interesting color blend because there's so many different things happening in here. Let's see. So you can see there's browns and blues and greens and all sorts of different things popping out at different spots. And I think that this would actually be really fun to just knit into mitts, knit into wrist warmers, something like that. I'm gonna need some of those really soon. But yeah, this is one way to go about it. And so that is what I have been doing with my wheel here. I've been pulling out one rollag at a time, randomly from the pile, and spinning them in succession. And I have been spinning them long draw. So we'll do a little bit of spinning now and see how it goes. So I'm actually just joining my rollag onto some singles yarn that's already on the bobbin here. This is actually the gradient BFL and silk fiber that I was spinning for a sweater. It's going to be a top-down sweater. And so those plies are on here right now. I actually have to wind this off onto a storage bobbin, but I'm just joining my rollag onto that yarn right now. Just getting this started. And so like I had mentioned, if you don't want to spin a rollag long draw, what you could do is you can just still draft it forward as you normally would if you were worsted spinning. Just draft it forward. And so you're not going to get a perfectly smooth yarn. You get kind of like a halfway in the middle kind of yarn. A semi this, semi that. Okay, so I am basically just spinning like a short backward draft. I'm just pulling back, 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 and then feeding on back, 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 feeding on, back, 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 back. As I spin sort of this backward, continuous backward draft, I am sort of compressing the yarn a little bit more. It is going to be a little bit more of a tighter twist. It is going to be a little bit more smoothed and compacted down. If you want the looser, fluffier, bouncier, sort of poofy fiber that comes with a woolen yarn, then you'll want to switch to a long draw or a woolen drafting style. So in that case, rather than keeping the twist out from between your hands, because when I'm spinning continuous backward draft, what I'm doing is I am preventing the twist from passing my forward hand. And so there is no twist, or aiming for no twist in between my two hands when I'm doing that continuous backward draft. But in this case, if I want to do woolen, I'm going to let that twist run straight up and I pull against that twist in order to generate my yarn. So I'm pulling backwards, and at the same time I'm adding twist. And as I pull, it is evening out all of the lumps and bumps along that strand. And then I pull back again. And you can see my forward hand is kind of like opening and closing. I open and close basically as kind of like a gate. This opening and closing allows the twist to kind of build up and then run in. I want it to run in at the time when I want it to run in, so that it can pull against these little lumps and bumps and even them out. And I'm going to let that wind on and then pull another length. So there's all this twist in between my forward hand and my fiber hand. Let that wind on. And what I have to pay attention to is that I make sure that I put in enough twist into this yarn that is between my forward hand and my fiber hand, before I let it run on. Sometimes I will let it run on and I realize afterwards that I didn't put enough twist into it, and later when you go and you ply it, it's going to be really loose and it may not be structurally sound. And so that's something that I really have to make sure of before I go on. So it's helpful that a lot of this fiber is colored, because I'm looking at sort of the angle of the colors that are twisting up into the single and making sure that the angle is not so loose and sloopy. It just kind of gives me a little bit of an indication of how much twist is necessary. And this is going to just take, you know, a few passes to figure out. And you can count your treadles. You can count how much distance, how much fiber you let go of. Now I do notice that sometimes there'll be like a slubby spot and then there's a thinner spot next to it. But sometimes I find that if you just keep tugging it a little bit, that slubby spot will eventually smooth itself out. So the trick is to get that part to smooth out before the thin spot gets a little bit too thin. So sometimes I might sort of like choke up on the yarn to catch that little thin spot and then let the thicker spot, that slub, kind of slide out and smooth out before I go on. And I kind of just let go of that and then let the whole twist even out in the whole single. So I'm going to let that slub here in between my hands, let that even out a little bit more. So you can see here, there's a big slub here and there's a really, really fine spot here. And I might just try and move into that slub area, twist it open a little bit to let those fibers slide, and then let the twist run back in. It evens it out a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to spin another rollag here, and without talking, I'm going to see a little bit how long it takes to do. Okay, so that is spinning one rollag from beginning to end. That amount of fiber, I feel like, would take way longer if I was spinning it continuous backward or continuous forward draft. When you spin rollags, it just seems like it's so much faster to produce the same amount of yardage that you would if you were spinning worsted style. So just spinning this long draw, it feels magical, just pulling your arm back and letting that fiber just ooze. It just kind of oozes like slime. You just ooze it out and it just stretches and pulls like taffy and it feels great. Yeah, that's just such a fun feeling. And then just watching all of those colors twist together as it makes yarn and stretch out, those thicker spots evening out. The whole process feels amazing and magical and wonderful. Now, one of the things that you'll probably want to do as you're spinning in that style is to make sure that you don't sort of squish your hand on the rollag too tightly. Don't grip the fiber too tightly because it will start to clump up and then it'll end up producing more sort of lumpy, bumpy fiber, lumpy, bumpy yarn. So just try to keep like a really, really light hand on it. As always, like when we talk about spinning and holding your fiber, the fiber hand has to hold your fiber like it's a baby bird. Don't squash it, don't crush it, just very, very lightly, and then spin like so. Let's pull one more here. Let's do a purple one. So spinning these rollags on a wheel is totally fine. You want to spin on an e-spinner, it's totally the same thing. If you wanted to, you could also spin with a supported spindle. And so we have many, many classes inside the School of SweetGeorgia teaching you how to spin with a support spindle. So for that, you can get a little bowl like this for your support spindle. You would put your bowl on the table and then you can spin like so. And this can sometimes give you a little bit more control over how you spin your rollags. And Debbie also teaches if you want to hold your bowl in between your knees. There are like different bowls that are sort of designed better for this sort of situation. But let's grab a little rollag here. Just take a piece of it. But if you wanted to, you could spin with your support spindle in your lap here. And so in this case, I'm basically just spinning the support spindle and then I'm doing the same. I'm drafting against that twist and I basically kind of like how I was holding my hand with the wheel and using my forward hand as a gate for the twist. I'm sort of doing that in this case as well because I'm adding the twist and then I'm kind of holding on to my spindle. Some people can spin and draft all at the same time, but in my case, I pause and I sort of hold onto the spindle and then I pull against that twist in order to make new yarn. And you can see, I can see the twist running up into this attenuated fiber here, and then I give it another twist. And that adds more strength to my yarn here, and then I can wind on. Now I find with other kinds of spinning, if I'm spinning sort of continuous backwards, worsted, and my regular default yarn, the way I normally spin at this wheel, I can watch TV and almost kind of spin mindlessly. My hands just know what they're doing. They're pulling out approximately the same amount of fiber every time, and I just kind of spin on automatic. But with this process, you know, working with these rollags, you are looking at the fiber all the time. I feel like this is a little bit more meditative in certain ways because you are fully and completely engrossed in this activity. I can't do this and also watch TV. I have to see what I'm doing. And so I am paying attention to sort of the shape of everything, the feel of everything. It's very intuitive, kind of knowing when to pull, when to let twist run in, how much to pull. All of these kinds of things are very much like you are gauging every second of your spinning. You're relaxed and you're into it and there's a flow about it, but you are very much intentionally concentrated on the thing that you're doing. Whether it's spinning these rollags by wheel or spinning with a supported spindle, it's the same. You're really, really paying attention to what you're doing. You're paying attention to the colors and the feel and the fiber and all that kind of stuff. And so you might believe that it's actually producing more benefit to you to work in this way because you're into it. So that is just a little bit about spinning rollags. If you want to learn more about spinning in this method, spinning from a woolen prep, spinning with woolen drafting styles, then I do highly encourage you guys to come and join us inside the School of SweetGeorgia. We have many, many classes from many different spinning instructors. And so if you learn really, really well from one particular instructor, that's great. But if you want to hear the same kind of technique from a bunch of different spinners who are all very excellent spinners, everyone teaches a slightly different way, and sometimes you might just need to hear something just a little bit different in order to get the information out that you need in order to do what you want to do. And so yeah, I highly encourage you guys to come find us over there at the School of SweetGeorgia if you want to learn more about fiber prep, spinning woolen style, spinning rollags, spinning with a wheel, spinning supported spindle. It is all there. Thank you so much for joining us for this today. I am going to spin a couple more rollags and then I'm going to wind this off into a center pull ball and then I'm going to two-ply it just like I have here and make a whole bunch of this yarn, make a whole bunch of two-ply woolen spun yarn and then make something from it soon. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you in the next one. All right, bye for now.